Hello friends, I'm back with another episode and this pertains to a recent history, a phase which is generally described as a blot on Indian democracy. We all know it as emergency, it is infamous as emergency. And why did it happen? What were the causes and consequences of it, and when was it proclaimed? We are going to have a look at it. The 46th anniversary of emergency has come and gone. It was supposed to be on June 25, 2021. It was a watershed event in India's history as it underscored the strengths and weaknesses of the various organs and estates of the country's constitution and governance. This move to exploit the constitutional provisions to preserve political power led to what is known as the darkest period of Indian democracy. On June 26, 1975, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister then, announced the imposition of a national emergency, which was actually set in motion the previous night, late night. It empowered her to rule by decree. Fundamental rights and civil liberties were suspended. The judiciary's powers were curtailed and the media's voice was stifled. There was an immediate outrage. It was inevitable. The Times of India carried a scathing obituary of democracy. The Indian Express carried a blank editorial. The government responded by banning all anti-government articles and illustrations. Barring the Indian Express and perhaps a couple of other media houses or publications, the entire media caved into the pressure and became willing instruments of government propaganda. If you recall, or the old timers will recall, that when emergency was lifted, Mr. L.K. Advani had observed that the Indian media was expected to merely bend, but it crawled before the Indira Gandhi government during the emergency. Such was the consequence of that draconian step. So why was this emergency imposed? What factors actually contributed or made it possible for emergency to happen, for that emergency to happen? See, there have to be certain inherent flaws in our national character that allows these things to happen. And first and foremost, the Indians are incorrigible hero worshippers. And hero worship invariably goes to its object's head. The person who is put on a pedestal starts thinking he or she is a god, although they are only ordinary mortals with all the flaws and failings of a human being. Indira Gandhi had won the 1971 general elections by a huge margin. In fact, Lok Sabha seats her party won was, the Indian National Congress was 352 out of 518, that is 518. Her stature as a strong and decisive leader had grown after India routed Pakistan in the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War. Her skills in strategic thinking were highlighted when she got the Soviet Union to sign a peace and friendship treaty which effectively neutralized Pakistan's two very powerful allies, China and United States of America. In those days, USA was backing Pakistan to the hilt because they needed Pakistan as their policeman in this region. So after the Bangladesh victory, Indira Gandhi's fame reached its zenith. People started calling her Durga, the slayer of demons. she was honored with the Bharat Ratna, which is India's highest civilian award, which can be given to a person, to a citizen of India, or even an outsider. But the thing was that these things, these eulogies, this worship, this award, everything, all this, it went to her head, and she was only a human being. So what goes up comes down. We need to remind ourselves that unlike Nehru, Indira Gandhi was not comfortable with democratic processes, traditions and conventions. So was it a streak of dictatorship or insecurity in her mental makeup that turned her into a control freak? She wanted to control everything, in the government, in the country, everywhere. So the consequence was that barely 3 years after her landslide victory, Mrs. Gandhi's popularity began to slide. Poor monsoons, high unemployment and pervasive corruption angered the people, and fuel was added to this anger when the media reported or quoted Mrs. Gandhi saying that corruption was a global phenomenon, implying that nobody can control it, not even her government. And this seemed to be some sort of justification of this anger, fueled a massive protest movement under Jayaprakash Narayan. He is popularly called JP or Loknayak. Her response was typical and imperious. Imperious she was, and whimsical. That was very much a part of her traits. And now let's go back just a bit, 2 or 3 years back, before she even thought of imposing emergency, to have a glimpse of her inclination to control everything. And the first target was judiciary, which is a very powerful check on the doings of the executive. Look at the manner in which she set about controlling the judiciary. The Supreme Court ruling in Golaknath versus the state of Punjab, this happened in 1967, had reversed its earlier decision, which had upheld the Parliament's power to amend all parts of the Constitution, including Part 3 related to fundamental rights. Indira Gandhi thought this judgment severely limited the control of the executive on the matters of the state. So she did not like the fact that the parliament's or the executive's powers were being curtailed. So what did she do? She introduced the 24th Constitutional Amendment, and it was enacted in 1971. 1971, when she was at the peak of her popularity, and there should have been no need for her to feel insecure. It enabled the Parliament to dilute fundamental rights through amendments of the Constitution. It also amended Article 368 to provide expressly that the Parliament has the power to amend any provision of the Constitution. The amendment further made it obligatory for the President to give his assent when a Constitution Amendment Bill was presented to him. Earlier than that and now, after emergency, many such amendments were actually reversed. So the President has the powers to send back a bill if he is convinced that it is not according to the letter and spirit of the Constitution. So that much powers he had, but even those powers were curtailed. And this is where the role of the judiciary comes into play. In fact, it was very surprising what happened next. A 13-judge bench of the Supreme Court upheld the validity of the 24th Amendment in the landmark case of Kesavanand Bharati versus the state of Kerala in 1971. So it was validated almost promptly. The verdict was a wafer-thin 7-6. Of course, that we have to give it to the learned judges, that they did not. There was a lot of debate and divided opinions, and the verdict could have gone the other way also. Anyway, so this was how she behaved at that time. But what triggered the emergency? What made her tread the path to this drastic, draconian step? Indira Gandhi had defeated Raj Narayan in the general elections of 1971. He lodged cases of election fraud and misuse of state machinery during the election campaigns. The Allahabad High Court found her guilty and declared her election null and void. It banned her from standing in elections for 6 years, and that would have finished her career, political career, for all practical purposes. On June 24, 1975, the Supreme Court upheld the decision. So it was validated even by the Supreme Court. The next day, JP organized a large rally in Delhi against Indira Gandhi. He declared that a police officer must reject the orders of the government if the orders were immoral and unethical, as this was Mahatma Gandhi's motto during the freedom struggle. So he brought in Mahatma Gandhi. He was clever enough to contextualize the then present with the past. And this naturally provoked Indira Gandhi. And she then did what she did. And that was, she requested President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed to proclaim a state of national emergency, invoking Article 352 of the Constitution and citing grave danger to India's security due to internal disturbances. So when the leader is in danger, the nation is in danger. When the leader is in danger of losing his or her seat, so the nation also, they say, is in danger. And that's how they try to, manipulate the perception. National emergency was imposed on the night of June 25, 1975. I have said this before also. The government clipped the judiciary's wings and launched a massive crackdown on the civil and political liberties of the people of India. Opposition leaders like JP, Morarji Desai, Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Lal Krishna Advani were joined in jail by some congressmen who had dared to dissent. And some of them were like Chandrasekhar and Mohan Dharia. They were quite prominent in those days, active also. Indira Gandhi turned overnight from India's Prime Minister to India's dictator. That was the transformation. And after that, she set about changing the Constitution of India in a never before manner. The changes were sweeping, mind-bogglingly sweeping, and dangerous too. So, what were the changes? The 38th Amendment barred judicial review of the emergency. An amendment was then drafted to clear Indira Gandhi from the Allahabad High Court ruling, which had held her election invalid. The 39th Amendment stated that the election of the President, Vice President, the Prime Minister and the Speaker could not be challenged by the Supreme Court. The most controversial was the 42nd Amendment, which, in a way, revised the Constitution of India itself. The preamble was amended. Fundamental duties were introduced. Fundamental rights were degraded and judicial challenges to changes were disallowed. So, nobody could go to the court and challenge these changes. So, after targeting the judiciary, Indira Gandhi went after the instruments of social justice. The government suspended the freedoms guaranteed under Article 19 of the Constitution. The police detained people without charges or a warrant. All the opposition leaders were arrested. Forced sterilizations and birth control programs were introduced, which also resulted in massive corruption naturally when there is nobody to question you. And the powers of the government are so unchallengeable, then corruption is but a natural outcome. Media was censored and stifled, and religious and political as well as some revolutionary parties were banned. So all that was dear to the founders of the Indian Constitution was almost destroyed. Her son Sanjay Gandhi, Indira Gandhi's son, Sanjay Gandhi, became an extra constitutional power. Whether it was forced sterilization campaigns or clearing of slums, he did it all with the finesse of a sledgehammer. According to the Shah Commission report, and I quote, "The manner in which demolitions were carried out in Delhi during the emergency is an unrelieved story of illegality, carelessness and sickening sycophancy by the senior officers to play to the whims of Sanjay Gandhi." Unquote. About 700,000 people were displaced from slums and commercial properties over a period of 21 months, including large areas of the old city. The Turkman Gate massacre remains a testimony to this. To this day, people over there remember that tragedy with pain and anger. Of course, when all this was going on, repression was going on, it was necessary for any dictator to do something to project a positive image. So economic reforms were focused upon. A 20-point economic program was devised to increase agricultural and industrial production, improve public services, and fight poverty and illiteracy. The fifth 5-year plan, those were the days of 5-year plans, which were based on the Soviet 7-year plans. I don't know about the Soviet Union or Russia now, but in India, the 5-year plan is now history. Nobody even talks about it nowadays. So, the fifth 5-year plan was in force during the emergency. It aimed at achieving two main objectives, and which were removal of poverty, and the slogan was Garibi Hatao, and attainment of self-reliance. During the emergency, the focus shifted to the 20-point program. Now the question arises, why did Indira Gandhi call for general elections? Those elections proved to be her doom. Is it because she was sure that the 20-point program would sway the public support in her favor? Or she foresaw a rebellion within the Congress that would destroy her hold on the party? Whatever the case, maybe both the factors played on her mind. But whatever the case, on 21 March 1977, the emergency was withdrawn, elections were held later on, and the Janata Party-led alliance won those elections. So what lessons were drawn from that dark phase of Indian democracy? First and foremost, the power to declare emergency now lies with the President of India, who is advised by the executive. Under Article 352 of the Indian Constitution, if the President is satisfied that a grave emergency exists whereby the security of India or any part of territory thereof is threatened, whether by war or external aggression or armed rebellion, not internal disturbance, armed rebellion, he may by proclamation make the declaration to that effect. Mind you, there is a vast difference between disturbance and armed rebellion. Then there were other safeguards introduced that which ensured that the fundamental rights will not be suspended. It was evident that it was essential to ensure that nobody assumed dictatorial powers and abused the Constitution. Therefore, the 44th Amendment was enacted, which made the following provisions. And what were those provisions? The term internal disturbance was replaced by armed rebellion under Article 352. Now the thing is, internal disturbance can be anything. Even 10 guys standing on the road shouting slogans is a disturbance, internal disturbance. But for and under the emergency rules, that was enough to, punishment or even proclaiming emergency. But now it would not be like that. It has to be a real threat to the country and in the form of an armed rebellion. The fundamental rights under Articles 20 and 21 can no longer be revoked even during an emergency. So this was a very powerful safeguard now which is in operation. The decision of the proclamation of emergency must now be communicated by the cabinet in writing. No more verbal orders, no more whims and fancies of an individual. It will have to be a collective decision in writing. It should be on record. Such a proclamation of emergency has to be approved by both the houses of the parliament by an absolute majority of the total membership of the houses. Now, within 1 month of this ratification, 2/3 of the majority of the members present in the house will have to vote in favor of it to validate the proclamation. Otherwise, the proclamation cannot operate. So it became a two-step safeguard. That is, first, absolute majority must approve of the emergency, and within 1 month of that, two-thirds of the voting members of the houses should validate that decision, proclamation of emergency. Only then the emergency can be imposed, otherwise it would not be operational. The safeguards do not stop here. To continue the emergency, that is, if it is necessary to, or it is felt by certain members of the government that emergency needs to be extended, then for that purpose the houses must reapprove the emergency every 6 months. So there will be a review, it will be scrutinized, and only then for further 6 months the emergency would be approved. So every 6 months there would be a review of the. But the best part is now, and that is that the provisions provide that 10% or more members of the Lok Sabha can requisition a meeting of the Lok Sabha. In that meeting, it can disapprove or revoke the emergency by a simple majority, not absolute, not 2/3, but a simple majority. In such a case, the emergency will immediately become inoperative. Isn't that great? That really strengthens our democracy. And it's high time that this thing was done. Well, And that is the end of story of emergency. But how effective these safeguards would be, only time will tell. Thank you for being with me. I'll come back with another episode soon. Until then, bye.